In our never-ending quest to keep our viewers entertained, Wrestlelamia is introducing a new series where we look at every wrestling year since the birth of Hulkamania and determine the good, the bad, and the downright ugly of it. Let's start off with that year and look at the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos. The year 1984 proved to be a hot one in the entertainment world as Michael Jackson's hair caught fire during a Pepsi commercial, the animated series Transformers debuted, the syndicated version of Jeopardy with Alex Trebek began its long run, Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, The Karate Kid, Gremlins, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom ruled the box office. In music, Van Halen's Jump became their only #1 single, while Culture Club's Karma Chameleon, Prince's Let's Go Crazy and When Doves Cry, and Madonna's Like a Virgin landed at the #1 spot in the Billboard Hot 100 in the USA. As exciting as things were for film, television and music, they were even bigger in the world of professional wrestling. 1984 was a huge year for wrestling as Vince McMahon began a full-scale campaign for dominance in the wrestling industry. While large organizations such as Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association and Jim Crockett Promotions were still going strong, McMahon began raiding every territory he could, gleaming their top stars not only to boost the WWF, but to weaken his rivals. As always, we start off with the good as #1, Mean Gene Okerlund debuts in WWF. The WWF was never known for its announcers, but that changed when Vince brought in longtime AWA announcer Mean Gene Okerlund. Gene was a competent play-by-play man, but his real skill lied in interviewing wrestlers, helping tongue-tied ones to get over in promos, and enhancing promos by wrestlers with the gift of gab, using subtle remarks and facial expressions to make their interviews even more effective. Gene would become synonymous with interviewing Hulk Hogan, but he would interview many other superstars as well. #2, Hulk Hogan wins the WWF Championship. Arguably the top moment of the 1980s, Hulk Hogan's WWF Championship win over the Iron Sheik not only launched a new era in the WWF, but a new era in professional wrestling as the WWF's flashy showbiz approach to wrestling proved extremely popular with the mainstream audience. While traditional fans scoffed at Hogan's wrestling abilities, he and Vince McMahon laughed all the way to the bank. #3, Piper's Pit debuts. Vince McMahon knew that every good babyface needs a strong heel, and he wisely chose Roddy Piper, a wrestler known for his ability to incite riots on the microphone. Piper used his weekly talk segment Piper's Pit to get over many legendary feuds, several which make our list for 1984, not only for himself, but for several other wrestlers. As Piper always said, just when you think you've got all the answers, I change the questions. #4, Randy Savage piledrives Ricky Morton through a bench in Memphis. Although there was lots going on in the WWF, Jim Crockett Promotions and the AWA hadn't given up yet. One promotion that continued to shine was Memphis Wrestling, where fans enjoyed the territory's off-the-wall storylines and violent matches. One in particular was the feud between the Rock and Roll Express and the team of Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo. During a match at the historic Mid-South Coliseum, Savage piledrived Morton through a bench, a spot that became legendary and was featured in the home video presentation at Pro Wrestling Illustrated presents Lords of the Ring, Superstars and Super Bouts. #5, Kerry Von Erich wins the NWA Championship from Ric Flair. Although the Freebirds vs the Von Erichs feud was arguably the zenith of world-class championship wrestling success, 1984 was still a strong year. The death of David Von Erich shocked the wrestling world and would serve as a harbinger of things to come for the brothers Von Erich, but Fritz managed to get an NWA World Heavyweight Championship win for his son Kerry, building a successful super show at Texas Stadium in honor of David and bringing in just over 50,000 fans. The card was highlighted by Kerry's win over NWA World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair. #6, Tuesday Night Titans debuts. Leave it to Vince McMahon to take a wrestling show and turn it into a zany talk show complete with wrestling guests, skits, and even an occasional match. The show was a poor man's rip-off of The Tonight Show, with Vince playing Johnny Carson and Lord Alfred Hayes playing his best version of Carson's sidekick Ed McMahon. No relation to Vince. Tuesday Night Titans would become known for its over-the-top skits, such as Mr. Fuji and the Magnificent Morocco's acting forays into Fuji Vice, Fuji Hospital, and Fuji Bandito, Kamala eating a live chicken on air, and George the Animal Steel receiving electroshock treatment to restore his speech functions. Yeah, the WWF was pretty wild in '84. Number 7, the Roddy Piper-Jimmy Snuka feud. One of the biggest wrestling feuds of '84 and one that firmly entrenched Rowdy Roddy Piper as wrestling's #1 heel, saw Piper and Jimmy Snuka do battle after the now legendary Piper's Pit, where Piper smashed a coconut over Snuka's head. Amazingly, the feud could have been even bigger, but Snuka's personal demons sidelined him, forcing the WWF to use wrestler Sam Fatu, the nephew of Afa and Sika, as the Tonga Kid. The Tonga Kid went from preliminary wrestler to main eventer thanks to his involvement in the feud, but by 1985 he was gone from the promotion. As big as this feud was, there was no telling how big it could have been had Snuka managed to keep things together. Number 8, The Last Stampede, Bill Watts and Stagger Lee aka Junkyard Dog versus Midnight Express. Cowboy Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling really came into its own when Watts brought in Memphis booker superstar Bill Dundee, as well as several Mid-South talents such as the Rock and Roll Express. One of these talents was manager Jim Cornette, who played a spoiled rich kid guiding heel wrestlers, in this instance the Midnight Express. Cornette and the Midnights celebrated a recent championship win with birthday cake and champagne, deriding the fans as they did. The fans had the last laugh though when the Rock and Roll Express snuck up behind Cornette and shoved his face into a cake. Watts enjoyed the segment so much he kept replaying it on Mid-South Wrestling television, to the point that Cornette threatened to sue Watts and Mid-South. Watts brushed off Cornette's tirade until he insulted Watts' son, leading to Watts pimp-slapping Cornette. However, Cornette got his revenge when the Midnights brutally beat down Watts. Watts, a legendary wrestler in his heyday, stepped out of retirement to challenge the Midnights, knowing Cornette could pay off any fine he imposed. A match was booked wherein Cornette would have to wear a dress if his team lost, but Watts would have to turn control of Mid-South over to Cornette for 6 months if his team lost. Watts teamed with a masked wrestler named Stagger Lee, as his good friend the Junkyard Dog was serving a suspension. Watts and Stagger Lee, who bore an uncanny resemblance to JYD save for his mask, triumphed at the match nicknamed The Last Stampede, further humiliating Cornette. Number 9, the Road Warriors debut in AWA and win the AWA World Tag Team Championship. Van Gagne faced an exodus of talent as Vince McMahon raided the AWA and every other promotion in existence. Gagne didn't give up, however, and brought in the biggest tag team in wrestling at the time, the white hot team of Hawk and Animal, aka the Road Warriors. Although Gagne booked the Roadies as heels, the fans quickly started cheering them. Hawk and Animal began a dominant reign as AWA World Tag Team Champions, giving the AWA a much-needed shot in the arm. Number 10, the Brawl to End It All, Wendi Richter vs Moolah. Women's wrestling in the WWF was deader than disco in 1984, that is until pop sensation Cyndi Lauper got involved in a famous angle with heel manager Captain Lou Albano. Lauper had asked Captain Lou to be in her video Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, and when the song took off, Albano claimed the lion's share of success for the video during an appearance on Piper's Pit, with him deriding women as well. Lauper eventually confronted him on Piper's Pit, telling him she'd manage a wrestler against his grappler. This led to the Brawl to End It All, a match between Lauper's charge Wendi Richter and Albano's client WWF Women's Champion the fabulous Moolah. The match was televised on MTV and became a sensation, fueling the rock and wrestling era. Number 11, STARRCADE 84. Jim Crockett Promotions followed up the success of its first edition of STARRCADE with a show in 1984, this time headlined by NWA World Heavyweight Champion Nature Boy Ric Flair defending the title against the American Dream Dusty Rhodes with special referee boxing great Smokin' Joe Frazier. This show was a disappointment compared to the all-star extravaganza of the previous year's STARRCADE, but JCP was ready to have a great year in 1985, and the seeds were being planted in '84. Number 12, Roddy Piper attacks Cyndi Lauper, Dave Wolfe and Lou Albano. We've seen Piper's name pop up several times on our list, and with good reason as he was the catalyst driving several storylines. Although he was still feuding with Jimmy Snuka, Piper found time to crash, both literally and figuratively, an award ceremony being held in Madison Square Garden to recognize the charitable efforts of Cyndi Lauper and Lou Albano. Albano had begun a slow-faced turn as he teamed with Lauper to raise funds to battle multiple sclerosis, a turn finally realized when Piper smashed an award over Albano's head, power-slammed Lauper's manager and real-life boyfriend Dave Wolfe, then kicked Lauper. The heinous act led to 1985's War to settle the score, and ultimately, the first WrestleMania. And number 13, the haircut match. Fans are still scratching their heads wondering what motivated Andre the Giant to team up with Jobber to the Star's Special Delivery Jones to battle Big John Studd and Ken Patera. Whatever the reason, it cost him big as Studd and Patera dispatched of Jones, then proceeded to double-team the 8th wonder of the world senseless. Things were just getting started, however, as Studd and Patera's manager Bobby the Brain Heenan had his henchman cut Andre's hair, and in the immortal words of announcer Vince McMahon, raping Andre the Giant's dignity. This solidified Heenan's status as the WWF's top heel manager and set the stage for Andre seeking revenge on Heenan, Studd, and Patera. But that was the good. What about the bad? As number 1, the AWA loses top stars. Vern Gagne was a talented promoter whose American Wrestling Championship was second to none. That is until the early 80s when cable television was making it feasible for promotions to go nationwide. Sadly, Gagne was reluctant to change what had worked for him for so long, and not only did he let Hulk Hogan slip through his fingers, but the promoter lost a number of other stars to the WWF, including Gene Okerlund, David Schultz, Bobby Heenan, and Jesse Ventura. Number 2, Black Saturday. One of wrestling's darkest days occurred on Saturday 14th July 1984, when wrestling fans tuning into Superstation TBS to watch Georgia Championship Wrestling's weekly 2-hour World Championship Wrestling show discovered the program had been bought out by the WWF and was now airing WWF matches. Fans used to the more athletic version of wrestling were dismayed by the WWF's cartoonish product, and ratings quickly dropped. Vince McMahon had promised Ted Turner he'd air original matches just as Georgia Championship Wrestling had for years, but chose to air recycled matches from other WWF programming. When Turner threatened to sue, a deal was brokered where Vince sold a time slot to Jim Crockett Promotions for $1 million. Rumor having it, McMahon used the money to bankroll WrestleMania. And number 3, Ken Patera and Mr. Saito arrested for beating up cops. In April '84, wrestlers Ken Patera and Mr. Saito were involved in an altercation with a police officer after a McDonald's restaurant filed a report alleging Patera threw a rock through the restaurant's window when he was denied service. After a wild brawl, Patera and Saito were arrested and eventually sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. The WWF would later run a storyline based on Patera's imprisonment following his release. But that was the good. The bad? What about the downright ugly? What was the lowest moment of 1984? Number 1, David Schultz beats up John Stossel during 2020 Wrestling Exposé. While wrestling was enjoying a resurgence in the early 80s, the WWF was the promotion that began getting mainstream attention thanks to the spread of Hulkamania. As always, the media was ready to jump on the bandwagon and kick the piss out of it, with ABC News' 2020 program doing an expose on how wrestling was worked, including former wrestlers showing how moves were performed, including blading. Vince McMahon dismissed the expose and denied wrestling was predetermined. When ABC reporter John Stossel went backstage, he asked wrestler David Schultz whether wrestling was fake. Schultz matter-of-factly replied, "You think this is fake?" as he slapped Stossel's ear, knocking him down to the ground. When the reporter got back to his feet, Schultz repeated things. According to the book Wrestling Babylon, WWF's insurer paid out $425,000 to settle Stossel's claim. Number 2, Vince buys everything. 1984 was a wake-up call for wrestling promoters as they realized the good old days of promoters monopolizing their regional territories was over once Vince McMahon brought the WWF from his father. While promoters were slowly testing the waters by running shows in rival territories, McMahon made no bones about what he was doing, running shows in rival promotions, and that was just the beginning. As detailed in the book Wrestling's Greatest Moments, McMahon brought up competitors' television time from under their noses, signed top stars and told them to walk out on their bosses in the middle of programs, and in some instances, offering to pay entire promotions. A legend has it that some promoters contemplating putting a hit on McMahon, but if so, nothing came of it, and the only thing that died was the majority of wrestling territories. It wouldn't happen overnight, but 1984 was the beginning of the end for wrestling's status quo. But there you have it, guys, our look at wrestling in 1984 with the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. Of course, next we'll be looking at 1985, which was most famous for airing the first ever WrestleMania. Be sure to leave your comments down below on what you think of the new series, subscribe if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.